If you touch a single hair on his head, I swear I'll end you with my own hands." Nathaniel stood in the pouring rain, his heart pounding, his voice trembling with rage, not from fear, but from love. Across the dark warehouse, his 4-year-old son was tied to a chair, tears streaking down his small face. This wasn't just about business or revenge or pride anymore. It was about a father willing to bleed to protect the child he had only just begun to know. And in that moment, everything changed. The ruthless CEO who once believed he didn't need anyone was now ready to give up everything for the family he never knew he was missing. Welcome to today's story. If you believe in second chances, in the healing power of love, and in the strength it takes to forgive, then this story is for you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss a story that speaks to the heart. Let's begin. The sky outside still wore its inky blue robe when the kitchen clock quietly struck 4. Under the dull hum of a flickering bulb, Rachel Moore sat alone at a tiny table in her cramped apartment on the outskirts of Hartford. Her coffee, long forgotten, had gone cold in the chipped ceramic mug between her hands. She hadn't slept again. It was something she had grown used to. Single mothers don't get to be tired. They just keep going. Rachel's eyes wandered to the little mattress by the window where Noah, her 6-year-old boy, slept, curled up like a kitten in a patch of sunlight that hadn't arrived yet. His breaths were soft and steady, lips gently parted, cheeks flushed from warmth, and his eyes, those striking gray-blue eyes Rachel had once stared into. The very same pair on a face she hadn't seen in over 6 years, a face she had spent too many nights trying to erase from memory. She looked away, pressing her palm to her chest to slow the ache. Once upon a time, Rachel was set for a different life. She had been the rising star of her economics program at Camden University, earning scholarship after scholarship, glowing internship offers, and the kind of praise that made professors shake their heads in awe. People said she was going to redefine the rules of finance, but the world she had built cracked open in a single heartbeat. Just before her final year, she found out she was pregnant. The man she trusted vanished as if the earth had swallowed him whole. No explanation, no goodbye, just silence. Faced with a choice, no 21-year-old should ever make. Rachel chose her child, and with that choice, the future she had worked so hard for faded like mist in morning light. She left university. Her scholarships dissolved. The doors that had once opened so easily slammed shut. The first years with Noah were not marked by lullabies and soft lighting, but by cold nights, late shifts, and the sting of rejection letters. She cleaned tables, answered phones, stocked shelves. Her hands were always sore, her bank account always empty. It wasn't until Noah turned 4 that a glimmer of light broke through. A modest position as a junior assistant at Lockridge Financial, one of Hartford's oldest firms. It wasn't glamorous. The pay barely kept them afloat, but it meant a routine. Rent paid, preschool covered, bread on the table. They lived simply, just the two of them, a 1-bedroom apartment with thin walls and a faulty heater, but Rachel never let Noah feel the weight of the world pressing down on her. She made sure he saw her smile every single day, even if her body ached and her spirit wavered. But that morning, as she buttoned Noah's school shirt and packed his tiny lunch bag, something felt fragile, like the day might break apart at any moment. Then the phone rang. "Rachel, I'm so sorry I can't take Noah today." Something urgent came up. It was the sitter, kind but unreliable. Rachel froze. She looked at the time, less than 30 minutes to clock in. A single late mark would be enough for her supervisor to fire her without a second thought. I don't have anyone else," she whispered, but the call had already ended. She stood still in the hallway, heart-pounding hand clutching her son's backpack. Outside, the first light of dawn stretched across the sky like a quiet promise. But for Rachel, it felt like the beginning of a storm. She looked down at Noah now, slipping on his tiny shoes with sleepy excitement, unaware of how quickly the ground had shifted beneath them, and in that moment, with no other choice left, she decided to take him with her. "I'm really sorry, Rachel," the sitter said with an apologetic sigh. "Something came up. I can't take Noah today." Rachel pressed the phone tighter against her ear, trying to steady the tremble in her voice. "I can't be late again," she whispered. "Please, isn't there anyone else?" But she already knew the answer. There wasn't. She had no family in Hartford, no one she could call for a favor at this hour. Her friends, the few she still kept in touch with, were either too far or too buried in their own lives. She looked at the time. Just over 20 minutes until she had to be at her desk. One more warning from her supervisor, and she'd be out of a job. Rachel turned to Noah, who was now sitting cross-legged on the floor, humming to himself as he played with his shoelaces. He looked up at her with wide, trusting eyes, the kind of look that always made her forget how heavy the world had become. There was no one else. She took a deep breath. She would take him with her. The headquarters of Lockridge. Financial towered over the city center, a sleek monument of glass and steel, cold, impenetrable. Much like the man who ruled from its top floor, Rachel stepped through the revolving doors, gripping Noah's hand tightly. He was bundled in his blue jacket, his small fingers tucked into hers, as if sensing the weight of the moment. Employees in tailored coats and polished shoes moved past them like a rushing current. No one paid them any mind. But Rachel could feel it, the unease under her skin. Children weren't allowed here. Not in a place like this. Not in the pristine, calculated world of finance. She whispered quietly to her son, "Stay close to me, sweetheart, and please no running around." He nodded solemnly, sensing her seriousness. Rachel could only hope her small corner of the office would be enough to keep him hidden. What she didn't know was that fate was already shifting quietly, threading her past into her present. In less than an hour, her son would unknowingly walk straight into the path of the man Rachel had spent almost 7 years trying to forget. And in that moment, everything would change. On the top floor of Lockridge Financial, Nathaniel. Lockridge stood silently, hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on the skyline. The city sprawled before him in steel and ambition. The empire he had built one calculated step at a time. At 38, he was among the most powerful businessmen in the country, brilliant, relentless, and impenetrable. He didn't believe in love. He didn't believe in family. Those things to him were illusions, emotional traps that weakened even the strongest minds. He had learned that lesson early. He had watched his mother, soft-hearted and easily broken, fall apart when his father left. Love had not saved her. It had destroyed her. So he built his world without it. No attachments, no vulnerability, no one to lose. Until today, until a boy with curious eyes would walk straight into his life and shatter everything. Downstairs, Rachel sat at her desk, heart pounding louder than the click of keys around her. She had given Noah careful instructions. Stay quiet, stay close. Don't touch anything, but children are made of wonder and motion. And in the few seconds, she looked away to check an email. He was gone. "Noah," she gasped, turning around so fast her chair clattered behind her. The chair beside her was empty, his bag still on the floor. But the boy had vanished. Rachel shot to her feet, panic clawing at her chest. She darted into the corridor, calling his name under her breath. Her hands were already slick with sweat. If someone found out, she could lose everything, her job, her income, her last foothold in a life she had fought so hard to rebuild. But she had no idea that the worst was yet to come, because in just a few steps, her little boy would cross paths with the one man she never wanted to see again. The corridor outside the executive suites of Lockridge Financial was silent and pristine, lined with polished marble floors and frosted glass panels. Executives walked briskly past eyes on their schedules, minds on profits, too preoccupied to notice a small boy wandering alone. But Noah, barely 6, noticed everything. This place was unlike anything he had ever seen. It shimmered with glass and silver and secrets. Compared to the modest neighborhood he shared with his mother, this building felt like a palace from another world. His shoes barely made a sound as he tiptoed farther into the unknown until thud. He walked headfirst into someone solid. Noah stumbled backward, blinking in surprise, and looked way up into the face of a man dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. His features were striking, severe even. But what stopped Noah in his tracks was the man's eyes. They were exactly like his own, a deep, stormy blue, quiet but intense. Something inside Noah stirred, something wild and certain and unexplainable. Before anyone could stop him, the little boy blurted out, "Daddy," and wrapped his arms around the man's leg. The hallway froze. Time stilled. People who had spent years trying not to make eye contact with Nathaniel Lockridge, the cold-hearted titan of the finance world, now stood frozen, mid-step, eyes wide. Nathaniel stiffened, every muscle locked. In all his years of controlled order and calculated moves, he had never experienced anything as jarring as the soft arms of a child wrapped around him, calling him something no one had ever dared say. "Who are you?" he asked quietly, his voice rough with disbelief. But the boy just smiled brighter. "I found you. I knew I would." Nathaniel stared down, stunned, soft brown hair, that familiar tilt of the chin. But those eyes were his. A wave of suspicion tightened in his chest. Then Noah. The voice sliced through the stillness like shattered glass. Rachel came running, her heels skidding slightly as she reached them, face pale as paper. Her heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. And then she saw it. Noah, wrapped around Nathaniel Lockridge. Her son, his father. The world tilted. No. This can't be happening. She had spent almost 7 years keeping this truth buried. She had built walls around the past, around her heart, and most of all, around Noah. She had planned every step to avoid this exact moment. But one innocent word from her son had undone everything. Nathaniel turned slowly, his eyes cutting into her like ice. Rachel Moore. His voice was deep, familiar and utterly unreadable. Rachel swallowed the lump in her throat, forcing herself to stand straighter. This is a misunderstanding. Mr. Lockridge, I'll take my son and leave right away." She reached for Noah's hand, but Nathaniel's voice stopped her cold. "Wait." His gaze dropped back to the boy. "Why did he call me Daddy?" Rachel froze. The question hung heavy in the air. Her mind raced. She had spent years preparing for how to protect Noah from this moment. But now that it was here, every answer felt too dangerous to speak aloud. Nathaniel knelt slowly, looking into Noah's face, like a man searching for a memory he couldn't find. Those eyes, that age, that night. It all came rushing back. Nearly 7 years ago, the night of the Camden Trust Gala, one of the most prestigious charity events in the financial world. The city of Hartford glittered with lights. Rachel, then a senior at Camden University, had only been there as part of the student support team, no more than a shadow behind a clipboard. She hadn't meant to cross paths with Nathaniel Lockridge. She knew of him, of course. Who didn't? The youngest CEO in the state's history. Brilliant. Ruthless, emotionless. And yet somehow fate had seated them at the same table. And by the end of that night, everything had changed. She hadn't planned to speak with him. That night, at the gala, Rachel was simply there to manage name tags and refill glasses, one of the many invisible students in black blazers and polished shoes. Nathaniel Lockridge, by contrast, had been the center of every gaze. He belonged to the marble floors, the chandeliers, the whispered awe. She did not, but fate doesn't follow rules. The event had begun to wind down, laughter spilled into the corridors and tuxedos loosened. Rachel wandered into the hotel bar, hoping for a quiet minute. And there, alone, with a drink in hand and his jacket folded over the bar stool beside him, was Nathaniel. He looked tired. Not like the man in headlines didn't expect to see the great Nathaniel Lockridge hiding out, she said lightly, surprising even herself with the teasing tone. He turned slightly, raising an eyebrow. "And where should I be, out there shaking hands with people who bore me to death?" She gave a half smile. "I suppose not. You don't strike me as someone who pretends well." For the briefest moment his lips twitched into something almost resembling a smile. He ordered another drink for her this time, and they talked. About work. About pressure. About what it felt like to carry expectations so heavy they could bend your spine. Rachel discovered that beneath the flawless suit and ruthless reputation, there was a man. One who bled just like everyone else, only he'd learned long ago never to show it. One drink became two, then three. The air softened, the space between them blurred. She couldn't remember who leaned in first. Only the weight of the hotel room door clicking shut behind them. Only the way the world disappeared outside those four walls. She woke up to silence. The kind that doesn't just fill a room, it hollows it out. Rachel blinked against the pale light slipping through the curtains. Her head throbbed not from alcohol but from realization. The other half of the bed was empty. No note, no trace. Just the faint scent of his cologne in the air and the ache of being foolish enough to believe that night meant something. She had imagined there was more beneath his surface, and maybe there was. But not for her. To him she had been nothing. Rachel dressed quietly and walked away, promising herself she would forget, but fate, once again, had other plans. 2 months later, everything changed. She stood in the cramped bathroom of her apartment, the pregnancy test shaking in her hands. The results stared back at her. Unblinking. Positive. Her knees nearly gave out beneath her. The dreams she once had, building a legacy in finance, becoming someone powerful and respected, suddenly felt like paper castles crumbling in the rain. She didn't sleep for days. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, whispering questions she didn't have answers to. Can I do this alone? Should I try to find him? Would he even remember me? Nathaniel Lockridge was a billionaire. A ghost behind bulletproof windows. A man who lived in a world she'd never truly belonged to. And so Rachel made a choice. She would raise this child. Not because it was easy or simple or safe, but because it was hers. Because Noah had already become the only thing in her life that made sense. She left school. Let go of her career. Watched her future narrow to a single path, but she never once regretted it. Now standing once more in front of Nathaniel Lockridge, her son's arms still wrapped tightly around her, Rachel could barely breathe. His eyes locked on hers, colder than before, sharper. But behind the suspicion, she saw it faint recognition. Like fragments of that long-forgotten night rising to the surface. "Rachel," he said, his voice deep and unreadable. "Why did the boy call me Dad?" Every muscle in her body stiffened. She could lie. She could pretend it was a mistake. A misunderstanding that Noah had confused him for someone else. But Nathaniel Lockridge was not the kind of man who could be easily deceived. Still, Rachel couldn't answer. Not yet. Instead, she bent down, took Noah gently by the hand, and walked away, her heart pounding with every step. Behind them, the door to the past swung open, and there was no way to close it again. Rachel stood still as the door clicked shut behind her, cutting her off from the safety of the hallway. She kept her chin up, her posture steady, but inside every part of her trembled like a piano wire pulled too tight. Nathaniel leaned back against his desk, arms crossed, eyes fixed on her with such intensity it was as if he could see right through the layers she'd built to protect herself. The silence between them was not empty, it was charged, humming with tension. "Tell me the truth," he said, his voice low and clipped. Is Noah my son? It wasn't a question. It was a command. Rachel's jaw clenched. Her breath caught in her throat, but she forced it down, forcing a steady rhythm into her lungs. She looked him straight in the eyes, the same eyes that stared back at her from her son's face, and said evenly, "No." The word felt like a stone dropping into water, small but devastating. A long silence followed. Nathaniel didn't speak, but his gaze sharpened, cutting into her like glass. He took a single step forward, slow and deliberate. You expect me to believe that he asked almost conversationally? You really think I'm that naive? Rachel didn't flinch. What you believe is none of my concern. That's the truth. A humorless laugh escaped him, quiet, cold. Interesting, he said. Then maybe you can explain why a 6-year-old boy whom I've never seen before walked up to me and called me Dad. Or why he has my exact eyes. Rachel's breath faltered for the briefest moment. She took a step back, instinct more than fear, but quickly steadied herself. Children say all kinds of things, she replied. He could have said that to anyone. Nathaniel arched a brow. Anyone or someone who happens to share his eyes, his hair, his chin. Rachel held her ground. You've been with more women than you can probably count. Maybe you have a dozen children scattered across the country. Maybe it's just a coincidence. What does it even matter to you? That hit. His expression didn't twist, but something flickered, something sharp and restrained. Because he said softly, "If that boy is mine, you don't get to keep that from me." Rachel's heart pounded. She could feel the truth rising in her throat like fire, but she shoved it down again and again. "He's not yours," she whispered, "and we don't need you." The words barely left her lips before his composure snapped. "You don't get to decide that," he growled, stepping forward. "If he's my son, I have rights. I have a right to know, to be in his life. And I'm telling you, he's not." The room felt like it might collapse under the weight of their rage. Every unspoken word between them hung in the air like smoke. Then, without warning, Nathaniel turned, yanked open a drawer, and slammed a thick file onto the desk between them. Rachel's blood turned cold. "I had you looked into." He said each word sharp as ice. "I know you left university in your final year. I know it was right after you got pregnant. I know you disappeared, changed addresses, started over." He leaned in, voice low and dangerous. "So tell me, Rachel, if Noah isn't mine, why do you look so terrified right now?" Rachel didn't move. Her eyes dropped to the folder, then back up to his face. "I'm not afraid," she said. Her voice trembled, but her eyes were ablaze. "I'm furious. You had no right to dig into my life. I had every right," he countered. "You brought a child into my building who called me his father." She stepped closer, her fists clenched. "You don't get to control this, Nathaniel. You lost that right the day you walked out of my life and never looked back." His expression darkened. "I didn't know." "Exactly," she hissed. "Because you never stayed long enough to care." They stood there, inches apart, their words sharper than blades, and behind all of it, between every breath and glare, was a single truth. Neither of them could say aloud, Noah was his, and the truth was breaking its way to the surface. "You're lying." Nathaniel said the words, leaving his lips like a blade. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. His eyes, those relentless storm-blue eyes, searched her face for cracks, and though his voice was cold beneath that glacier of control, was something unexpected, something even he hadn't realized had slipped through hurt. "If you're so certain," he said more quietly now, "then why not take a DNA test?" Rachel froze, just for a second, but that second was enough. Nathaniel saw the flicker in her eyes, the pause, the fear, and it told him everything. "What are you so afraid of?" he asked, his tone soft but edged with steel. "If Noah isn't mine, what are you protecting?" Rachel inhaled slowly, forcing herself to speak without trembling. "I don't owe you proof, Nathaniel." He let out a laugh, but there was no warmth in it. Just a cold certainty. You can refuse Rachel, but that won't stop me. I'll get that test one way or another. And when I do, you won't be able to deny it any longer. Her heart hammered inside her chest. The walls she'd spent nearly 7 years building around her son, her life, her choices, he was tearing through them piece by piece. She walked out of his office with her head held high, but her grip on her bag was iron tight. Her steps rushed unsteady. The hallway blurred as she moved past the rows of cubicles, barely aware of the stairs she might have drawn. He knew too much, and he wasn't going to stop. By the time the elevator doors closed behind her, her breath was shallow and her thoughts racing. She had to stop this. Somehow the next morning there was no time to run. No space to hide. Nathaniel was waiting when she arrived. Arms crossed, eyes like ice. I sent you the test forms. He said flatly. You refused. Why Rachel didn't speak. She moved past him, trying to pretend her hands weren't shaking. But Nathaniel wasn't the kind of man you could brush aside. He stepped in front of her, blocking her path without raising his voice. Answer me, Rachel. She stopped. Then slowly she lifted her head. Her gaze was firm, steady. Because I don't have to. Nathaniel's jaw clenched. What are you so afraid of? I'm not afraid, she said, though. Every nerve in her body screamed otherwise. I just don't want my son dragged into your world, a world where everything is cold, calculated, and disposable. That struck a nerve. For a moment he faltered. Just a moment. Then he laughed again, quietly. You think I'd hurt him? That I'm incapable of being a father? No, she said, her voice sharp and sure. I think you're a man who doesn't know how to love anyone but himself. The words landed like a slap. He didn't flinch, but his fists curled at his sides, his frame taut with silent fury. You're wrong, he said quietly. Now, I never planned for this. I never imagined I could be someone's father, but if he's mine, I won't walk away. I don't believe you, she replied, and I don't need to. We've made it 6 years without you, and I won't let you show up now and destroy everything. Nathaniel's expression turned unreadable. You think you can erase me? Yes, she said, and I will if I have to protect him. They stood locked in a silent war of wills, two people staring down the line between past and future. But what Rachel didn't know, what she couldn't have predicted, was that Nathaniel Lockridge didn't lose battles, and he had already made a decision. He would not walk away. He would not be erased. That afternoon, Nathaniel summoned his legal counsel. His voice was calm, measured, but his eyes held the quiet fire of a man on a mission. Tell me everything about parental rights, he said. If the boy is mine, I want to know what the law allows me to do, because for the first time in his life, something mattered more than pride, and he wasn't going to let her keep it from him. Do I have a legal path? Nathaniel's voice was firm, measured. Across the polished conference table, his lead counsel hesitated, flipping through documents. If a DNA test confirms paternity, yes, you can petition for legal recognition, but the courts will weigh more than just biology. They'll consider the mother's legal standing, and above all, what's in the best interest of the child. Nathaniel didn't blink. His jaw tightened, but there was no hesitation in his eyes. He had already missed nearly 7 years of Noah's life. He wasn't going to miss another day. And if Rachel continued to build walls between him and the boy, he would not hesitate to tear them down with law, with persistence, with everything he had. While the tension between Rachel and Nathaniel simmered in silence, Noah remained blissfully unaware. To him, Nathaniel wasn't a CEO or a threat. He was just someone familiar, someone who made him feel seen. Whenever Nathaniel visited the office or met them at the park, Noah lit up. He would run straight into his arms, speaking in rapid, excited bursts about dinosaurs, dreams, and snack preferences. And Nathaniel, who once ruled entire boardrooms without blinking, would kneel down to his level listening, as though every word the child said mattered more than any $1 million deal. It unsettled Rachel. She watched the way Noah gravitated toward Nathaniel, how the man's entire demeanor softened around her son. The way he adjusted Noah's backpack, offered him his hand. At the crosswalk, remembered how he liked his sandwiches cut. This wasn't the man she had met all those years ago at a gala. This wasn't the cold, untouchable tycoon who vanished without a word. This was someone else. Someone who was slowly, quietly becoming a father. And that terrified her more than anything. Because if Nathaniel decided to fight for Noah in court, she might lose him. There was no more running. Rachel could feel that. One afternoon, as Noah played on the slide in their local park, golden light spilling through the trees, Nathaniel turned to her. His voice was low, even, but unshakable. Eventually, I'm going to know the truth. That much is inevitable. She didn't respond. He stepped closer, gaze locked onto hers. So you have a choice, Rachel? You can work with me? Or you can try to shut me out and watch me fight my way. In Rachel's stomach twisted. Because deep down she knew this wasn't a man who gave up when he wanted something, and now for the first time in his life, what he wanted wasn't power or prestige. It was a little boy named Noah. Nathaniel Lockridge had built his empire on precision, discipline, and control. Fatherhood had never factored into his life plan, but that plan was beginning to unravel in the most unexpected, tender way. It started with small things, a shift in routine. He found himself checking the time not to monitor markets, but to count down to when he might see Noah again. Instead of staying late to finalize mergers, he began slipping out early to meet them at the park. Instead of boardrooms, he found himself sitting cross-legged on the grass, listening to a 6-year-old's theories about which superhero was faster. "Do you like superheroes?" Noah asked once, climbing into his lap with the casual confidence only children had. "I don't really have time for them," Nathaniel replied. "So, you're busy a lot, huh?" Noah blinked up at him. "Do you like ice cream?" Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. "Not particularly." "Why? Because I love it. And if you're my dad, then you should like what I like, right?" Nathaniel froze. It wasn't a challenge. It wasn't manipulation. It was just a truth spoken with the complete, unquestioning trust of a child who saw only love. And every time Noah reached for his hand, every time he looked up with those same storm-blue eyes, Nathaniel felt something in him shifting, something real, something irreversible, and Rachel, watching from across the park bench, felt her certainty begin to crack. Nathaniel wanted certainty. He wanted a DNA test. But Rachel, she wanted distance. Not because she feared the truth, but because she feared what he'd do with it. Once he had proof, what would stop him from demanding full custody, from walking into Noah's life and changing everything? Yet the boy had a will of his own, and Noah was drawn to Nathaniel like a sunflower to the sun. There was no logic to it, just instinct. Joy. Whenever Nathaniel came around, Noah lit up. He rushed to him, arms wide, babbling about monsters and moon missions. He laughed louder, smiled longer, held his hand like he belonged there. And what scared Rachel most was... Nathaniel responded, not as a man pretending, not as someone playing a part, but as a father. She watched from a distance, first in disbelief, then in confusion, and finally in quiet surrender. He knelt to tie Noah's shoes without being asked. He listened, actually listened to stories about fire-breathing dragons and talking trees. He ordered strawberry ice cream, even though she knew he hated sweets. And when he looked at Noah, it was no longer the gaze of a cold, untouchable billionaire. It was the gaze of a man discovering that love doesn't always ask permission. That night, Rachel had barely finished her last task at work when the phone rang. "Rachel, you need to come home." Now Noah's burning up. Her stomach dropped. She dropped everything and ran. By the time she burst into their tiny apartment, the scene shattered her heart. Noah curled on the bed, cheeks, flushed sweat, clinging to his forehead, whispering "Mommy" in a voice barely louder than a breath. She wiped his face, placed cool compresses, gave him medicine, but the fever refused to break. His breathing grew labored, his skin was hot like fire. "No, no, no!" She called for an ambulance, but the answer chilled her. "Severe storm in the area," said the dispatcher. "The soonest arrival time is 40 minutes. 40 minutes felt like forever. Her hands shaking, her thoughts frantic. She did the only thing she could. She called Nathaniel. It rang once. "Rachel, it's Noah. He's burning up. The ambulance. They can't. I'm on my way." He didn't wait for more. 10 minutes later, headlights pierced the rain. A sleek black car slid to a stop, its engine growling like a beast. Nathaniel leapt out. His expression was taut with urgency. He saw Rachel clutching Noah, and for a second all his sharp features softened with concern. He opened the passenger door without a word, helped settle Noah in and closed it gently, like the boy was made of glass. Then he slid behind the wheel and drove like a man possessed, slicing through Hartford's flooded streets, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, eyes locked on the road as thunder cracked overhead. Hours passed. The worst of the storm had ended, and so had Noah's fever. Now, in a quiet hospital room bathed in sterile light, Rachel sat beside her son, watching his chest rise and fall in steady rhythm. The IV drip clicked beside them, a sound oddly comforting. Noah would be okay. Her shoulders sagged with exhausted relief, and then she turned. Nathaniel was still there. He hadn't left. He hadn't even moved from the chair where he sat. Elbows resting on his knees, hands loosely clasped, eyes still fixed on the sleeping child. Dark shadows sat beneath his eyes. His expensive shirt was wrinkled. He hadn't touched his phone, but he stayed. And in that moment, Rachel saw a truth that silenced everything else inside her. Nathaniel Lockridge could be a father, not the kind that shows up when it's convenient, but the kind who stays through the storm. She had spent years believing she had to protect Noah from him, but now, for the first time, she questioned it, because maybe, just maybe, he deserved a chance to protect Noah too. The skies above Hartford turned a shade darker that afternoon, swollen with rain and a promise of thunder. But the storm Rachel feared wasn't the one brewing outside, it was the one ripping through her chest. Her breath came in sharp gasps as she burst through the daycare doors. "Where's my son?" The staff looked startled, voices overlapping in panic. He was picked up. A man came, said he was family. He knew Noah's full name. Rachel's blood turned to ice. Was it Nathaniel Lockridge? The teacher's eyes darted side to side. "No, I don't think so. He wasn't on the pickup list." It felt like the floor caved beneath her. Noah was gone. Her hands trembled violently as she reached for her phone, dialing the police. But the dispatcher's voice was a blur, distant and slow, too slow. She didn't have time to wait. There was only one man with the reach and power to find her son faster than anyone else. Her fingers hovered for only a second before pressing the call. He picked up on the first ring. "Rachel, Noah's missing." The silence that followed was instant, hard and deafening, like the stillness before a bomb goes off. Then came Nathaniel's voice, low, sharp, unflinching. "Tell me everything." "Now, they said a man picked him up, but it wasn't you." "No ID." "No one saw clearly, just he's gone." Nathaniel Rachel's voice cracked her knees, buckling. "Noah is your son." The confession landed in the middle of the chaos, like a match to gasoline. But Nathaniel didn't respond with disbelief this time. Only fury. "You should have told me." He said, his voice flat, his rage precise. "But right now, I don't care about the past. I'm going to find him." She heard the shift in his tone, his warning. "From this moment on, Rachel, you don't make another decision about our son without me." But Rachel didn't care. There was no pride left, only fear, only Noah. Within 5 minutes, Nathaniel's phone rang again, an unfamiliar number. He answered. A voice, mocking and slick, slithered through the speaker. Well, if it isn't Hartford's golden boy, Nathaniel's blood ran cold. He recognized that voice, Victor Langston, a disgraced tycoon. A man Nathaniel had crushed years ago in a hostile takeover so ruthless it had become the stuff of Wall Street legend. Victor lost everything, his company, his legacy, his name. Nathaniel never looked back, but clearly Victor had never forgotten. You took my world from me. Victor said, now I've taken yours. Nathaniel's grip on the phone tightened until his knuckles turned white. If you lay a hand on him, Victor, I will come for you. Victor chuckled, casual and cruel. I'm not a monster. I don't want to hurt the boy, not unless you force me to. What do you want? Everything. I want to watch you fall, your empire, your money, your pride. I want you humiliated. On your knees. Nathaniel's eyes darkened, but his voice remained cold steel. You'll never get what you want. Then I guess we'll both find out how much your son is worth to you. Victor hung up. And in that moment, Nathaniel Lockridge, who had once ruled the world without fear, felt the full weight of vulnerability for the first time, because this wasn't about business, this was about Noah, and the man who had once believed himself incapable of love. Now had someone he would give up everything to protect. The dim warehouse reeked of rust and gasoline. A single light bulb flickered overhead, casting long, twisted shadows on the cold concrete floor. In the center of it all, Noah sat tied to a chair, his small body trembling, his cheeks streaked with silent tears, but he didn't scream. He didn't plead. He just looked ahead with wide, terrified blue eyes, holding on to courage in the only way a 4-year-old could. Nearby, Victor Langston stood with a pistol in hand, his finger resting far too easily on the trigger. He smiled as the door creaked open. You got here faster than I expected, Lockridge. Nathaniel stepped inside, soaked from the storm, his shirt clinging to his frame, a storm of his own brewing behind his eyes. He didn't look at Victor. He didn't speak to him. His eyes were locked on Noah. Dad, the whisper was barely audible. But it was everything. Nathaniel's jaw clenched, and for a brief second, the unshakable man cracked. Then he turned to Victor, voice low and cutting, "Let him go." Victor gave a dark chuckle, pressing the barrel against the side of Noah's head. Do you really think I'd just hand him over? Nathaniel inhaled deeply, slowly, raising both hands into the air, every motion deliberate and controlled. Take me instead. Victor blinked. What? Let him go. I'm the one you want. You want revenge. You want to destroy me. Then take me. Nathaniel's voice didn't tremble. His stare didn't falter. Victor paused just long enough for hope to flicker in Noah's eyes. Nathaniel took another step forward. Hey, buddy, he said gently, his voice cracking with emotion. I'm here now. I'm taking you home. Noah's lower lip trembled. He nodded through tears, but before Nathaniel could take another step, a noise, a sudden sharp clatter outside, a door, the wind, the police. No one would ever be sure. Victor jerked, his finger twitched, and the gun fired. The sound tore through the warehouse like thunder. Nathaniel's body jolted. His leg gave out as searing pain shot through him. Blood bloomed beneath his trousers, dark and fast. No Rachel's scream ripped through the silence, her voice cracking as she burst in from the shadows. She had followed the police, but she was too late to stop the bullet. Then chaos. Officers stormed the warehouse in full force. Drop the weapon. Get on the ground. A bullet sliced through Victor's shoulder. His scream echoed against the metal walls as the gun clattered from his hand. Seconds later, he was pinned to the floor, shouting curses no one listened to. But Nathaniel didn't move, didn't care. He was already crawling across the floor, blood trailing behind him, each movement sending fire through his body. His hands trembled, his vision blurred, but all he saw was Noah. The boy was sobbing now, arms tied tight, eyes wide with fear. Nathaniel dragged himself forward, inch by agonizing inch, until he reached him. With the last of his strength, he pulled at the ropes until they gave way, then gathered Noah into his arms, holding him tight against his chest. "I've got you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You're safe now. I'm here." Noah buried his face in Nathaniel's shirt, gripping it with tiny fists. "Dad, don't leave me again." The words sliced through Nathaniel like the bullet never could. He held him tighter, shaking. "Never," he whispered, pressing his lips to his son's temple. "I will never leave you again." Victor Langston was dragged out in handcuffs, bloodied and defeated, his plans crumbling beneath the weight of a father's love. Rachel ran to them, her knees buckling the moment she saw them together, covered in blood but breathing, alive. She fell to her knees beside them, tears streaming freely. Nathaniel looked up at her face, pale, drenched in sweat and pain, but in his arms Noah was safe, and that was the only thing that mattered. Their nightmare was over, but something new had just begun. Tears streamed down Rachel's cheeks as she dropped to her knees beside him, her trembling hands instinctively pressing against the bleeding wound on Nathaniel's leg in a desperate attempt to slow it. "You're hurt." She choked out panic, flickering in her eyes as crimson stained her fingers. Nathaniel winced, his breath, ragged, his body growing heavy with exhaustion. Yet despite the pain, a faint, almost amused smile curved his lips. His arms stayed wrapped firmly around Noah, his fingers stroking through the boy's tousled hair with infinite tenderness. "It's nothing," he murmured, voice low but calm. "As long as our son is safe, nothing else matters. Our son." For the first time, Rachel didn't correct him. She didn't retreat behind her walls, because she knew deep in her heart that he meant it and that he had changed. The cold, unreachable executive she once knew was gone. In his place was a father, and she wasn't afraid of letting him be one. The sterile brightness of the hospital room pressed down like fog. Nathaniel squinted against the harsh lights, hating everything about this place, the smell of antiseptic, the beeping machines, the confinement. But most of all, he hated the guilt that gnawed at him, heavier than the bandages wrapped around his leg. He had always believed that distance made him strong, that emotion was a liability, vulnerability, a weakness. But when Victor pointed a gun at Noah and his son cried out for him with eyes full of trust and terror, everything he thought he knew shattered. He had nearly lost Noah. Not just because of Victor, but because of his own fear of feeling. And if he didn't change, he knew he'd lose Rachel too. As those thoughts churned through him, the door creaked open quietly. She entered balancing a small tray in trembling hands. Her hair was pulled back, and fatigue lined her face, but her eyes were full of warmth and care. She sat beside him and pressed a cool hand to his forehead. "How's the pain?" she asked softly. Nathaniel looked at her, not in passing, but really looked. And for the first time, he didn't guard his heart. He didn't shield himself behind control or silence. He simply allowed himself to feel. "Rachel." His voice was hoarse, careful. She turned to him, waiting. "I've loved you." Since that night, she froze. Of all the things he could have said, that was the last she expected. He went on slower this time, every word carrying weight. "I wasn't built for love. I told myself that I hid behind business, power, success, because it was easier than admitting I was scared." His fingers reached for hers, uncertain at first, but she didn't pull away. "You made me feel something real, and I didn't know how to handle that. So I ran, her heart twisted. You disappeared," she whispered. "No goodbye, no call. You left me alone with everything." He nodded, his eyes glistened, but he didn't look away. "I was a coward." The words sat in the air like truth too long unspoken. "But when I found out about Noah, when I realized what you sacrificed to protect him, and how fiercely you've loved him, I knew I couldn't keep living behind that armor anymore. He gripped her hand tighter. You and Noah, you're my family. And I want to fight for that now. I want to be better for both of you. Rachel couldn't hold back the tears anymore. She had never asked for wealth for comfort for the extravagant world Nathaniel came from, all she'd ever wanted. Was this a man who wouldn't run, a father who would stay, a heart that could open, even if it had once been locked away? Nathaniel, she whispered, pressing her forehead gently to his. I never needed your money or your power. I just needed you. He leaned into her touch, his eyes full of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Hope. And you have me, he said quietly. All of me always. For the first time in years, Nathaniel's heart raced, not from fear, but from something far deeper, a sense of belonging. As he stepped out of the hospital's sterile brightness, days later, a warm spring breeze brushed across his face, and then he heard its small, fast footsteps and a voice that cracked his heart open. Dad. You're not leaving again, right? Noah flung himself into his father's arms, clinging tightly. Nathaniel dropped to one knee, pulling him close. No, buddy, he said softly, eyes locked with his son's. I'm not going anywhere, I promise. Rachel stood nearby, watching the moment unfold. Her chest tightened with emotion. For the first time, she felt like this right here was home. But what happened next took her breath away. That evening, as the sun spilled gold across the tiny garden behind their building, Nathaniel led her out onto the grass. The scent of blooming roses lingered in the air, and then he dropped to one knee. A small velvet box rested in his hand. Inside, a delicate ring sparkled in the fading light. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. Nathaniel, what are you doing? He smiled, not his usual composed expression, but something open, certain, and completely unguarded. 5 years ago, he began, voice low. I made the mistake of running from what I felt, and I lost time. I can never get back. He looked up at her, eyes bright with conviction. But I don't want to lose another second. Marry me, Rachel. Let's raise Noah together. Let's build the kind of family we always dreamed of. One built on love, not fear. From behind them, Noah clapped his little hands. Say yes, Mom. I want you and Dad to get married. Rachel let out a soft laugh through the tears gathering in her eyes. She looked at the man kneeling before her, no longer the cold, distant executive she had once feared losing, but a man transformed by love, grounded by fatherhood, and strengthened by vulnerability. And she knew. Yes, she whispered. Their wedding was simple. No glitz, no grandeur, just vows whispered beneath a canopy of trees, promises exchanged with their son standing between them. But it was perfect. After everything, Nathaniel didn't just change his life, he changed his purpose. He restructured his company, launching foundations for single mothers, support programs for orphaned children, and scholarships for families in need. Because he had finally learned power means nothing without compassion, and wealth means nothing without someone to come home to. On a sun-drenched afternoon, the three of them strolled hand in hand through the very park where it all began. No more hiding, no more silence, no more distance, just a family, rooted in truth, growing in love. Nathaniel had once believed that control made him strong, that detachment kept him safe. But in the end, it was love that saved him. Not just a love of passion, but one of devotion, courage, and commitment. He had finally become the man Rachel and Noah always deserved. Some stories begin with broken hearts and unanswered questions. But the most beautiful ones, the ones that stay with us, are those where love finds a way to heal, even after years of silence. Nathaniel thought he could live without love. Rachel thought she had to carry everything alone. And little Noah, he just wanted a father to come home to. In the end, it wasn't power, wealth, or success that brought them together. It was a promise whispered in the darkest moment. I will never leave you again. because family isn't always planned. Sometimes it's found, sometimes it's fought for, and sometimes it's the very thing that saves us. If this story touched your heart, let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to believe in love again, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that speak to the soul. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay kind, stay strong, and never stop believing in new beginnings.